I'm sure very few of you know me actually, but thank you anyway, Justin. So love the talk by Patrick there and Aidan. I particularly like Patrick's talk because it touched on some of the things I'm going to talk about. There's a lot of overlap between biohacking and kind of biochemistry and metabolic disease and what fixes that. Obviously, it makes sense. I'm not a young bucko entrepreneur like Patrick, sadly. I'm a 50-year-old married man with 5 children, and I'm kind of the bad cop because I was a corporate manager for 15 years. So I wasn't the entrepreneurial kind of good guy. I was the guy on the wrong side of the desk from you. But I also was, for the full 30 years of my career, an expert problem solver. So I have a biochemical engineering degree originally from 1990, UCD, and I got into the highly technical sphere of problem solving, leading teams in complex multifactorial problem solving. So I'll tell you now a little bit of my story. In 2012, I was relatively focused on health. I did triathlons, I did some bits and pieces. I thought I was eating healthy. But in 2012, I got some standard blood tests. Nothing special, they were routine. And a few of the markers were really high. One of them was GGT, which is gamma glutamyl transferase, which is a liver enzyme. And interestingly, Patrick mentioned glutathione, which is the body's master antioxidant, really important. And gamma glutamyl transferase, when it's high, means your glutathione is being broken down. So they've got an inverse relationship in a biochemical sense. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that the normal range was around 15 to 50, and I was at 120, right? And I had very high serum ferritin, which is the iron loading in the blood. And this is a really great measure that no doctors really know about. Serum ferritin, when it's high, indicates you have inflammatory issues. You could have hemochromatosis, which is an iron loading disease, which will kill you in your 50s and 60s. That's a big deal. But if you don't have hemochromatosis, it means you've got metabolic syndrome, which is insulin resistance syndrome, which is hyperinsulinemia. So long story short, the GGT being high and the ferritin being high, I didn't know at the time, and the doctor didn't know, that it meant I had insulin resistance syndrome. No question about it. My cholesterol was high also, but the doctor wasn't quite so worried because it wasn't crazy high. I went to a second doctor, right, a more experienced person with 25 years experience. And that doctor also couldn't answer the questions I asked. I asked, what are the meaning of these high markers? Because I'm a technical problem solver and I see I'm way outside the normal distribution. So I know this means something big. This is not small shit. I knew that, even though I didn't know what they meant. So I went to a second doctor and I asked the same question. What are the implications for morbidity or mortality? What are the implications of these high readings? You must know, you're a doctor. And the second question is, what are the factors in my life that will affect these things? What are the factors that will cause them to be high that I can address, the root causes? And I got zero answer on both, from both doctors. And I went to a third person, a very published, really high-level guy. And I didn't get much more, right? So I realized then there's something enormously wrong with the world of medicine. If standard blood tests, which I researched and within a week found out, they had massive connections to morbidity, mortality. GGT blows away cholesterol in terms of predicting your early demise. No question. Serum ferritin, massive. They didn't even know that, because those metrics cannot be addressed with drugs. So I had a problem. I went and I researched. I logged on to ResearchGate. I got a corporate log on to the last 100 years of scientific research, because I realized instinctively, immediately, if these doctors have no idea what this means, and I know it means big stuff, there's no way I'm going to find it by just getting a book. It's not going to be in a book. It doesn't make sense. So I went to the research and I researched ferritin and I researched gamma glutamyl transferase and I researched cholesterol. And within a few weeks, because this is my art, I realized within a few weeks largely what they meant. And it took me around 4 weeks of obsessive nights and weekends through the published literature, not through websites, to actually work out the biochemical pathways and realize, shit, carbohydrate metabolism is my problem. And I realized that fat isn't the issue, it's carbohydrate. So I was eating all the healthy whole grains, I was eating, you know, all this food pyramid stuff and slapping myself in the back. Long story short, I immediately dropped all the carbohydrate. I began to eat fatty lamb, fatty fish, avocado, as Patrick mentioned, all of these foods. For the first couple of weeks, I actually felt bad eating them because my instinct, after 44 years of indoctrination, every shred of my mentality told me these are going to give me a heart attack. But my research said these are going to save me from a heart attack. So I kept going. I lost 35 pounds, around 16 kilos in 8 weeks. I went back at 6 weeks and 9 weeks. GGT ferritin shot down. All my biomarkers resolved. Didn't surprise me. I was pleased, but it didn't surprise me, because when you do a proper root cause analysis and you know you have the answer, right, the results come out as you predict. That's a test for a good hypothesis. So anyway, that was my story, and I got involved in traveling around the world a little, especially after David Bobbitt, who's one of Ireland's richest entrepreneurs. He owns and runs H&K International, which is a $700 million business. Now, David's a super smart guy, as you can imagine, so he has resources. But I'll tell you briefly his story, because it's very important. David Bobbitt at 52, 6 years ago, was a high-flying executive getting corporate top executive medicals every 6 months. And he was running 4 times a week. He was slim as a whippet, right? He could fit in the tux from his Debs, right? That's how slim he was. Super fit. And the doctors described him as bulletproof. Bulletproof, specifically. And he got all the tests. His cholesterol was good and all his markers, his bloods were good. And they said, wow, you're top 10% fitness. Went on treadmills, ECGs, all the big shit. Top 10%, you are bulletproof. And then something happened, David. He was in America and he went to the Cooper Clinic. And he happened to get a calcification scan. Now, the calcification scan is a grossly underused technology, a 5-minute CT scan that sees the calcium in your cardiac arteries, your cardiovascular system. And the calcium is a protective mechanism built through hundreds of millions of years of evolution, that when you get inflammatory disease in the walls of your arteries, which is atherosclerosis, which causes all the heart attacks, your body will sense this and bring in bone matrix and bring in calcium and create bone structures to shield your arteries and strengthen them, right? It's not a defect, it's a response to injury. So the scan that sees this calcium is incredibly predictive of future heart attacks, as you would expect, because it sees the disease itself, right? It's not like cholesterol and blood pressure, they're all proxies. So David goes in and he gets the worst 1% heart disease for his age. He has a 70% chance of a cardiac event or death in the following 10 years. His Framingham risk score, which looks at cholesterol and blood pressure and smoking and family history, said he was 5%, which is great at 52. He's actually at 75%. So the calcium scan is enormously important. That's one key message I want you to get this evening. But David looked at this and he was told, you don't need surgery. Don't need surgery, because they discovered years ago that putting in stents for asymptomatic, non-symptomatic people does not extend life. It does not prevent heart attacks. At best, it relieves some symptoms. So stents are for critical cases having a heart attack, and they can be useful. But the vast majority of stents are thrown in there for the dollar. The trials have proven they don't extend life. So he said, okay, I don't need stents. I need medications, some statins, some other stuff. And he went online and began to look up this calcification. And within a day or two, he was obsessed. Because he could not believe, and he's absolutely right, he could not believe that there is a scan out there that takes 5 minutes for $100 that will tell you you're going to die with incredible precision, blow away all the blood risk markers the docs use, make a laugh of them, make a joke of them, and no one's using it. No one's using it. And there's a film, The Widowmaker, that David spent $2 million to get made, and it tells the story. So I won't go into it here, but there are political and financial reasons why the test was suppressed. And the movie, which is free on YouTube, we'll send you a link, explains them. So I'm going to leave that. So David anyway made this movie, became obsessed with saving the world from heart disease, because why should he, as a wealthy man, get this heads up, right, in the States, and change his whole life? What he's done in the last 5 years is he has taken his 906 score and he is only going up 4% a year. And if you only go up a few % a year in calcium, it means you've essentially stopped the disease process. And if you stop the disease process, your risk plummets down towards a guy who had a 0 score, which I happened to get last year, right? So you need to stop the calcification progressing. So it's not just a scan that will tell you you're screwed when the doc thinks you're great. It will also allow you every couple of years, if you have a high score, to track that the biohacking you're doing is working. Because you might do lots of good stuff, and the scan in a couple of years is still going up at an alarming rate, and you need to dig deeper. You need to be a root cause engineer and go deeper. You could have heavy metal contamination. You could have a special hormonal issue. It's your life. No one's going to do this for you. No one's going to do you. I've seen that. So the calcium scan is massively important. A couple other quick things on the calcium scan, and I'll move on to the causes. So I had a guy, Noel, in work, just a guy in my office, you know, one of the engineers who worked for me. And he came up to me and he said, Ivor, I'm listening to all your stuff and I'm a bit worried. And I'll briefly tell you a story. 42 years old, right, 3 children. Brother had a massive heart attack at 53. Cousin died in his sleep in his 50s. So he's got all this family history shit going on. It's not good. So he's worried. But his doctor says, your cholesterol's low, your bloods look great. In spite of your family history, which I am cognizant of, the doctor, you're good. Specifically said, you're good. Bloods are good. Okay. Noel wasn't happy because he's listening to me. So he goes further and he insists on getting a cardio. And he wants to get a calcium scan. The cardio eventually convinces him, we don't do calcium scans. It's not a good test. Again, you need to see the Widowmaker why he says that. And he says, we'll do an ECG and we'll do a treadmill test. It's amazing. It's not. It's bullshit. An ECG, right, on a treadmill, David had them pass them with flying colours. Very weak predictor of issues. Very weak. So Noel gets them anyway and he comes in with flying colours. And a cardiologist tells him, right, all good, no worries. Family history, yeah, but you're lucky. You dodged the bullet. So Noel goes home and says, no, I need to get this calcium scan, right? So he goes back and he insists on a calcium scan. Eventually they agree. Cardio says, okay then, give him a scan. What happens? He gets a score that says he has the arteries of a 65-year-old at 42. Diffuse calcification throughout his coronary vessels. High-risk patient. The cardio secretary rings him immediately and says, you must come in and get medications. The same cardio that said, no calcium score. But I had told Noel from his bloods that his cholesterol ratios were not ideal and he probably was diabetic, like his relations. Because diabetes causes most heart disease. It's just most people are never diagnosed with diabetes. So there are countless diabetics, type 2, in the grave who died long before they got diagnosed. So I have a few other stories, the exact same thing as I've told you, so I won't repeat them. I have a guy in America who's 29 years old, the same as Noel, got the scan. He got the scan, he got a 600. He has the arteries of an 82-year-old at 29 years of age. He had to push through the doctor to get that scan. His father died at 39 of a heart attack, but the doctor said, you're actually okay, because your cholesterol's okay. So we'll get into cholesterol in a moment. And I have a 73-year-old with a 0 score, who has the arteries of a 48-year-old. So you may hear that calcification is an inevitable thing that happens with age, and that's a lie. You can be in your 70s with a 0 with arteries of a whippet, and you can be 29 with arteries of an 82-year-old. Overwhelmingly, which you are will depend on what you put in your mouth. It'll depend on getting sun exposure, magnesium, potassium. It'll depend on exercise, yeah. But 80-20, it'll depend on what do you put in your mouth, because the human machine most responds or gets disease or gets defunct or destroyed by what goes in the mouth. That's the way to kill it. Mostly, 80-20, 80%. So we'll get on now to, well, what does cause it? And I will mention cholesterol, and I've mentioned it a couple of times already. Cholesterol is extremely unfortunate. And it is a huge business, and that's why we've heard about it for 30, 40 years. Everyone knows that cholesterol is a problem in heart disease, right? Pretty much. We've all heard it. I heard it my whole life. You know, margarines that reduce cholesterol. It's largely not relevant. Now, in your cholesterol panel, you've got your LDL bad cholesterol and your total cholesterol and your HDL good cholesterol and your triglyceride. Doctor has to give you those numbers if you get a test. The LDL is so ambiguous, it means almost nothing. The majority of people with heart attack patients in America have a lower than average LDL now. And it's not just because of statins. So the LDL does not mean nothing. It's just so useless, no engineer would touch it with a barge pole. That's what I discovered 5 years ago. The HDL is useful because if that's low, it's much more indicative of a problem than LDL being high. So it's better, but it's still ambiguous. The total cholesterol divided by the HDL, the ratio, is very good. And the triglyceride value divided by the HDL is excellent. Possibly 6 to 10 times better than an LDL figure. So that's what you can get from the cholesterol panel, the ratios. And the reason the ratios are actually very predictive is not about cholesterol. Because the ratios of your lipoproteins, your cholesterol particles, very faithfully reflect your level of insulin resistance or insulin sensitivity. So to an engineer I discovered years ago, they're not even measuring the thing they think they are. They're measuring a proxy for something that's massively important, which is insulin resistance. To give you an idea, Professor Riff in 2002, a pretty happening guy, did a study on middle-aged people. Now, middle-aged people are the people who have the most heart attacks, middle-aged and older. So he got several hundred people, and he measured their insulin resistance with a very accurate steady-state plasma glucose. I won't get into the detail, but SSPG is a serious measure of insulin functionality. So he split them into thirds. The lowest third of insulin sensitivity, the middle, and the highest. And over the next 7 years, they tracked them. And in the people who were most insulin sensitive, there were 0 disease, 0 death, 0 anything. They were shockingly healthy for middle-aged people. 60 was the average age, right? So these people, it's how the fuck have we got like this big bunch of people with no disease and no death? But the middle third had 12 instances of disease and death, right? 10 of disease, 2 deaths. And the upper third, who are most insulin resistant, had 28 instances, right, with 4 deaths. Diabetes, cancer, general heart disease and heart attacks, severe hypertension. Now, statistically, I can tell you, the statistical power of that result was enormous. It was p equals 0.0001. It predicted incredibly accurately who would go down because it's so important. They luckily in that whole experiment run for 7 years measured the LDL bad cholesterol. You know how much it predicted outcomes? Surely it wasn't 0 prediction. It was 0 prediction. Your risk for having high LDL was 1.001 times bigger than low. Nothing. So head to head, and I've got around 20 studies, insulin, if you just take this away, is vastly more important than bad cholesterol. So we get on then to what causes it, and it's going to overlap a lot with Patrick's talk. The primary cause is to become insulin resistant and hyperinsulinemic, and no doctors are measuring insulin. They're just not doing it. And there's political, financial reasons for that too, but they're not doing it. So hyperinsulinemia / insulin resistance is the primary driver of heart disease. It also is type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes, people think it's high sugar. It's not high sugar. That's when you've been diabetic for 15 years. Type 2 diabetes starts when you have an inappropriately high insulin response to your food. And that happens 20 years before you get a diagnosis. And for most people, would happen long before they get a heart attack. So that's a key thing, hyperinsulinemia. Another key thing, though, in fairness, is the eating of vegetable oils. We believe more and more from the research is a serious issue. So for peroxidation of these delicate molecules and the damage they incur in the industrial processes making vegetable oils and margarines, they're persona non grata. Taking in high PUFAs, or polyunsaturated fatty acids, from vegetable oils, bad news. Olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, fine. Not vegetable oils, right? So that's another primary cause. And just to tie together the cholesterol and the real causes, I'm just working on new material. And today I said I'm not going to do slides because we're in a pub. So I will tell you though, if you think of your artery as a pipe which it is, the most exotic pipe in the universe, and it's got walls, and it's got a lumen where the blood flows, the walls protect you from any problem with damaged cholesterol LDL particles, right? So when the theoreticians and the lipidologists and the cholesterol heads tell you that bad cholesterol causes heart disease, the vast majority don't know anything. Like, that's the doctors, they've just heard it. But the hardcore guys who study it tell you that if you have more particles, more will go through passive translation through the wall into the wall of your artery, and there they will become entrapped, they will get oxidized, inflamed, and they will set off the whole catastrophic cascade of inflammation of atherosclerosis. And they're actually kind of right. Cholesterol particles can go into the wall and are part of the process. Why are they not the root cause though? And the reason is the wall of your artery on the inside has an incredible structure called the glycocalyx, right? Which is a kind of a sugar backbone molecules that make hairs on the inside of your artery. They only discovered it 30 years ago. If you cut an artery out and you try and put it in a science lab and look at it, the glycocalyx is gone. So they missed it for most of human science. Now with electron microscopes and in vivo samples, the glycocalyx can be seen. And what it does is it filters the LDL lipoproteins and manages their flux. And it does a mountain more stuff. And I'm excited about it because I've been studying it. Huh?
It's massive.
It's enormous. But 1, 2, 3, the glycocalyx is just the first barrier to cholesterol being a problem. You eat a high carb, high sugar meal, your glycocalyx has gone to shit for the next 16 hours, right? If you get through leaky gut, you get lipopolysaccharide and endotoxins, that's going to cause a problem with your glycocalyx. So I don't have time to go into it in depth, but glycocalyx is the first barrier on the inside of your artery wall. Then you've got the endothelium, the single cell layer of endothelial cells. And hey presto, that manages how much LDL particles come across too. So through transcytosis, where the cholesterol particles get absorbed into the endothelial cell and they get brought across and they get exocytosed into your artery wall. This is a managed process. You eat the wrong food and do the wrong thing and you will fuck that process up. And I have the papers. But it doesn't end there. Because inside your artery wall there are proteoglycans, which are sugar molecule structures which are used for myriad processes. And they trap the cholesterol particles. And hey presto, if you take a diabetic's blood in a Petri dish, it will have twice the cholesterol entrapment of a normal healthy person's blood. So even when you get down to what traps the particles in your wall rather than letting them move in and out and work, even then it depends on what you put in your mouth. So 3 layers of managing your cholesterol particles that no one talks about. All they talk about is more particles, more get in. They missed the whole engineering of it. You have 3 layers, and every single layer depends on whether you eat right or live right, as Patrick was talking about, or not. Everything. So it's not so much a cholesterol thing. Yes, if you have more particles, you will tend to have more trapped. But it completely depends on the health of those 3 layers. So it's not really cholesterol that's the root cause. It's kind of a distraction. So I just wanted to explain that. So if I get to the key things I would do, and I'm not a biohacker per se, but I am essentially biohacking, but I'm not doing, say, the more drug aspects of it. First and foremost, sugars and refined carbohydrate explode in your upper intestine. They cause GIP hormone release. They lead towards hyperinsulinemia and all the problems I'm talking about. They're bad, bad juju. Vegetable oils, no bueno. Don't go there. And that means because most processed foods are stuffed with sugar, refined carb and vegetable oils, which is the triad of horror that's driven most chronic disease in the 20th century, you can't really eat those foods. And if you read the labels, you can try and pick the least bad ones. To be honest, just eat real food. You don't have to worry about it then. Make it simple on yourself. Make it simple. So there, high healthy fats are very important because fats have A, D, K2, and many other important vitamins and minerals. A friend of mine, a doctor on the West Coast, you may know him, Dr. Ted Naiman, he says the human body is the most complex chemistry set in the effing universe. And it is. And the biggest thing that makes that machine work, well or bad, is what goes in the mouth. So the healthy fats bring in lots of fat-soluble vitamins, D, A, K, and many more. And by going lower fat, you miss out on a lot of that important components. Another key thing, magnesium, potassium, and some crucial, and even a chloride actually is emerging, not just sodium, but chloride. These are used in many reactions, and if you go low on them, it's a problem. If you get into the S's, I call them, sun, sleep, and stress. So lack of sun exposure, lack of vasodilation, lack of nitric oxide released in your body, which helps your arterial health. Lack of sun's a problem. You can get UV lamps, you can get real sun if you can get it. I know Ireland's shit for that. But in fairness, in the summer you can get what you can, right? Sleep is hugely important. I underestimated that from my corporate career. I was living on the edge, a bit like Patrick described. Crazy stuff. They did a study on American Marines, and for 3 or 4 weeks they reduced them to 4 or 5 hours sleep. They just pulled them back a couple hours. Their insulin sensitivity halved on that single intervention. So reduced sleep raises cortisol, other hormones, drives up insulin and insulin resistance. So insulin is a great gauge. Not only is it causal when it's high, and it drives incorporation of glucose into the arterial wall and lipids and fats, but it's also a great gauge for your health. You smoke, you're going to drive up your insulin and your insulin resistance, right? You get stressed out, you're going to drive. Your free fatty acid flux in race car drivers before they get in the car are in the ultra diabetic range, right? Chronic stress drives up free fatty acid release and glucose release, which is an arterial insult chronically. So those kind of sleep, stress, and sun, they're all important too. And then exercise, I can't leave out. I don't do a huge amount. I do resistance training, weights, and I do a little bit of jogging. But resistance training, pound for pound, minute for minute, gives more benefit for insulin sensitivity than just running for long periods. I know there's a gentleman in the audience who I met when I was speaking in Manchester last year, and I can't recall his name, but I will say that gut health and microbiome is really important. Now, my personal opinion is, if you put all the right fuel into the machine, your gut microbiome will morph to be a healthier microbiome. But also, if you have a bad microbiome, even if you eat properly, you may have an issue and may benefit from fixing the microbiome. Fascinating human experiments on that too. They got humans and they actually put lipopolysaccharide and endotoxins that come from bad microbiome and leaky gut, put them into humans. And within a day or two, they shot their insulin up and their insulin resistance, because that shoots up as an immune reaction too. So hopefully you'll get that insulin resistance axis is at the center of modern chronic disease. And everything you do to lower your insulin, one of my best buddies is a microbiologist master, Gabor Doshi, and he runs the Lower Insulin Facebook group, and that's the name, Lower. Anything you can do to lower your insulin and lower your glucose is going to give massive payback. You dick around with your cholesterol, fair enough, but an engineer wouldn't do that. The only reason to look at cholesterol is if you change your diet and it shoots up, you got to go in and make sure that there isn't something ominous afoot. But to do that, you need to check all your other markers. A1C, insulin, glucose, homocysteine, you know, your free fatty acids, myriad markers, and make sure that a shoot up of cholesterol does not indicate a bad thing. So it's not nothing, but it's, relatively speaking, been disgracefully exaggerated for the past 50 years. So actually, I didn't script this talk. I have no slides and I went straight from the hip. So I'm not actually sure when to stop. So I think I'm probably at 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Eat to your meter. So yes, so I'll give a few things. The calcium scan for middle-aged, middle-risk people, 45 male or older, 55 female, is in the guidelines. It will blow away every risk factor in terms of predicting whether you're going to have a heart attack or other death, and also telling you how much disease you have or not. That's first thing. Second thing is, there are a lot of good measures, but post-meal glucose, you can get a €50 meter and just check an hour after your meals, an hour or two after, are you rising above 6 or 6.5 millimole? It's an incredibly useful test to say if you're eating the wrong thing.
The point is, if they eat sugar and starch, it will go above 8, 9, 10, 15, whatever, guaranteed they don't even need a meat.
Well, I would have to answer that because I get it all the time.
I think that meat is a great thing, but the point is, if you eat sugar and starch, it's gonna spike, and not only does your blood glucose spike, but your blood insulin goes up 10, 15 times.
The insulin is more important postprandial, but to be honest, you're going to have a hard time getting that test. So I interviewed the world master, Dr. Joseph Kraft in Chicago, on post-meal insulin, and he tested 15,000 people with 5-hour assays where he measured glucose and insulin at a half hour, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it's all out there on YouTube. Absolutely agree, but asking people to take post-meal insulins is probably not practical. On the glucose, the only reason I don't say if you eat starch and a bit of sugar, it's going to go up is because many people have healthy metabolisms where they can still do that. Now, it's not going to last, but I'm just conscious that often we get attacked.
60% of the population is overweight and they already have metabolic syndrome. And
so on the record, right now from CDC data, 64% of adult Americans over 45 years old are essentially diabetic. Two-thirds. Two-thirds of American adults over 45. 52% of American adults over 21 are essentially diabetic. They won't call them diabetic, but they admit that they've got glucose and insulin dysregulation. They're diabetic. There's no question about it. Blood.
The calcium is a blood test?
No, it's a CT scan, a high-speed X-ray. I got it done, my co-author. I have a book, Eat Rich, Live Long, and because I'm a new author when he published last March in USA, I actually forgot again tonight to bring any books. So it's kind of a funny thing, you kind of forget to bring books. But the book, Eat Rich, Live Long, goes through all of what I said and everything else.
How do you do the post-meal glucose test?
Post-meal glucose test, I'll give you a couple of hacks, seeing as we're at a biohacker event. So the post-meal glucose you can do by just getting a diabetic blood glucose meter. Prick your finger. Yeah, I got 3 or 4 of them at home. So that's easy. The other hack is if you want a 2-hour postprandial insulin or post-glucose insulin like Dr. Kraft did incredible work on in the 70s. The way to do it if your doc don't want to do it is you drink 75 grams of glucose or dextrose in water 2 hours before the blood draw is going to happen. So basically you might be out by 10 or 15 minutes, but he just takes a blood fasting glucose or fasting insulin. And he doesn't know it's a 2-hour insulin. So when the result comes back, and if you're under 30 microunits, that's good. If you're over 40, you're diabetic. But you'll come back maybe with a 26, which is brilliant. But the doc will think that was a fasting insulin. He'll go, oh my God, you're diabetic. But you'll know. But that's a kind of a hack. But I've heard from people tonight and elsewhere, Irish doctors, I'm hearing, are refusing even basic insulins. So everything that's useful for human health, or particularly leading edge useful, you will tend to find it's hard to get. Like the calcification, like the insulins, you go ask for a C-peptide, even ask them for a homocysteine. You know, they're going to what? Because the whole system has morphed over 30 or 40 years, has been molded in the image of how the system works. It's kind of cholesterol, blood pressure and stuff, and we have treatments. We don't have a treatment for insulin. The States is insane. I mean, when I go over there, I just like, unless you're eating in very good restaurants, it's insane. And basically, I was in Spain there and I saw, I think it was €2 per kilogram of refined flour. I think it was €9 for a 5-kilogram bag. And it just occurred to me, that kilogram is grown in the field, harvested, processed, shipped, packaged. The margin of the supermarket and everyone in between is all put in there. I'm a corporate guy. And they're selling it for €2 a kilogram. That's beneath cheap. That's literally zero cost. Coconut oil, avocado oil, they're crushed from real food.
What about when you're cooking them?
I use lard or I use butter, largely, or coconut oil. The rapeseed oil was developed over many, many years because this is fascinating. The industry knew that the excessive omega-6 and the low omega-3 was a problem. They knew it. The Japanese 15 years ago were trying to breed cattle with more omega-3. The vegetable oil guys genetically adapted maize or whatever it was to make canola. So they knew that the current vegetable oils were a problem. Now, at the same time they knew they were a health problem, don't forget that we were all getting told to eat them for our hearts in parallel at the same time. But they knew there was a problem, so they developed canola oil, which is maybe much higher omega-3, maybe 60-40 omega-3, 6. So I would say it's better bad stuff. So it's like low tar cigarettes, because well, to be honest, polyunsaturated oils, 3 and 6, for hundreds of thousands of years we had less than 1% of energy in our diet from these polys. They're used in cellular membranes, they're very important for cell membrane fluidity, they're critical. But you need less than 1% in your diet. Currently people are eating 11%. So why eat canola when you can eat real food? That's a major question. Why eat all these polyunsaturates that went through these industrial processes? It's not to say that everything industrial is bad. It's not. Why would you eat them if you're really focused on your health? And we know these molecules are very delicate. Why would you eat lots of them that have already been put through industrial high temperature pressure processes? It wouldn't make any sense unless you know there's a damn good reason to eat them. And there's no way anyone knows that, because the science is not there. If anything, the science would say you got to be really careful with them. So just take them out. Take the starches and sugars out, because it's easier to take them out than to play with them. I mean, I found that. I fast a lot. Whenever I speak in a really big event, I fast for 24 hours minimum before I go on stage. So we talked earlier about biohacking. Fasting is a performance drug. If you're fat adapted and you're a long time on a high fat diet, when you get to 24 hours with no food, you start getting really alive. I know it sounds like woo. I mean really alive.
I think you want to mention that fasting for 24 hours puts you into ketosis.
Oh yes.
And that's what the questions were. What's ketosis? Basically, ketosis is the state of fasting.
Yeah, and if you overnight, as Patrick mentioned, overnight you kind of get a bit of ketosis for free, but it's not very heavy. But if you carry on through the day and don't eat till 6 p.m, by the afternoon, I used to piss off the engineering and management teams in Hewlett Packard so much, because I would not eat breakfast or lunch. And at a 3 o'clock meeting that'd be quite aggressive sometimes, I was on fire. The rest of them had just eaten a lunch. I mean, it's just like a side through grass. It's unbelievable. It's living. It's living ancestrally, to be quite honest. One of the reasons is, this is not proven, you might be running 50-60% ketones fueling your brain versus 100% glucose for the vast majority of modern humans eating crap diets. Interesting though, I do have one paper that is quite fascinating. You know that exercise gives you neurological benefits. Everyone knows that. Loads of papers. Weren't sure why. One team did a study and found out the main reason why exercise gives neurological benefits. It's because of beta hydroxybutyrate. The exercise benefits to the neurological biochemistry are mostly mediated or caused by an increase in beta hydroxybutyrate. And beta hydroxybutyrate is the ketone you raise when you go into ketosis. So there's actually not too many surprises here. All roads converge at some point when you've looked at the whole entirety of the science and integrated it. I was an integrator, by the way. Integration is my thing. But yeah, and biome, very important and grossly under-recognized. And of course, antibiotics now are killing gut microbiome, causing knock-on effects. Celiac disease, I mean, 1% are celiac. I'll ask you one thing, right, and I'll leave it at this. Imagine we discovered a new crop that looked cheap and could feed loads of people today. And we said, wow, these seeds, let's call them Obama seeds. Right, I made that up. Obama seeds. And we said, wow, we discovered these and they got lots of energy and they're really cheap and they grow like shit and it could be great. So they start making them into little patties and breads and eating them and they seem okay. But then we're 2018, so you got to do safety testing, obviously. That's the world we live in. When wheat was discovered, there was no FDA. So you do the testing anyway, and you do a big load of people, you follow them for a few years, and you find out that it will kill 1% of people who eat them. It will kill them. Celiac disease kills you in a very painful, terrible way. So you find out the Obama seeds kill 1% of people. would they hit the market? Of course they wouldn't. Wheat is no different, right? This is the hilarious thing. Around 30% of people have significant wheat intolerance. Rough and tough looking at different papers. 1% roughly are celiac. They will die if they keep eating it. You know, they won't die tomorrow, but they're going to die young and painfully. I know some celiacs. Their lives were destroyed when they were young. They lost their childhood until they actually got off it and were diagnosed. So if we discovered wheat today, it would never pass. But if you say wheat's bad, you're called a conspiracy theorist, a food nut, or dare say it, a biohacker perhaps, you know? So we have all of these incongruities. We have the absurdities in the modern world that if you actually reflect the real science and speak it, if it threatens cultural or corporate or financial interests, you'll get on Quackwatch pretty quickly. There's lots of real quacks in Quackwatch, don't get me wrong, but there's also a few really smart guys like Dr. Ron Rosedale, who was the discoverer of leptin's importance and an incredible understanding of biochemistry of insulin back in the 80s. He's on Quackwatch. So there you go.
And Tim Noakes, for instance.
Tim Noakes has been harangued, Gary Fetka in Australia. There's hundreds of billions of dollars in food and pharma, and to be honest, if I was in either of those businesses, I know I'd be on the other side, and I'd be on the other side. I don't like admitting it, but I'd have to be, because I got a mortgage and 5 kids, and if I was in a competitive intelligence department and I was on that side, I'd have to say, got to do my job, got to keep moving ahead, got to get promoted. Humans are like that. But I mean, if I was in a business like that, I'd be conflicted. But equally, I got to pay the mortgage. And this is what drives a lot of the humans. They're not evil. They just all move towards protecting their business. You have to protect your business. And some woo about wheat being bad for you is just a competitive threat. You know, it's the way it is. Anyway, that's my thoughts. Thanks.